In this video, we're going to take a look at the new geometric pattern in Fusion 360's product design extension. Hey everyone, this is Matt with Learn Everything About Design, and in this video, I want to take a look at the geometric pattern tool. This is just added inside of the product design extension, so it's a brand new tool, a brand new thing that we can apply to our designs, but keep in mind that it is behind the extension, which means that you do need to use cloud credits or purchase that additional functionality. If you're looking into these tools, you can start a 7-day free trial by first going to your extensions and activating that trial. For this tool, I've played around with it a little bit to try to figure it out. And I will say that I found some limitations and some areas where it works and some areas where it doesn't. So I want to talk about those a little bit to make sure that we understand where it currently fits in the design process and where I think it could be. So to get started, we're going to go to our plastic tools and we're going to select geometric pattern. For the first example, I'm going to start with this square face. And what we need to do is we need to select a face, and then we need to begin by selecting the object type. Now there are three main object types that we can apply by default: a sphere, a cylinder, and a box. Now with each of those, it will apply that across our selected face based on the distribution we choose. We also have the option to do a custom. I'm not going to be talking about customs, but this allows us to actually select a specific object that we want to use for the pattern and the orientation. For most of these examples, I'm going to be using the sphere, and we're going to take a look at what some of these options mean so we can better understand them. First, I'm going to reset my distribution type to be rectangular, and then we're going to talk about the object size. We have size limits, and this is going to be the smallest and the largest, this case, a sphere, but the smallest and largest version of those spheres. We're going to say 1 for the smallest, and we'll say 5 for the largest. And then we have the spread, and what the spread is going to dictate is the distribution based on these limits. So if we set this to -1, they're all going to be the first size, 1 millimeter. If I set it to +1, they're all going to be 5. If we set it at 0 right in the middle, it'll be an even distribution going between those two limits. Next, we need to select the distribution type. And for this example and for the next one, I'm going to be using rectangular. Rectangular allows us to choose either the increment or the extent of the spacing, similar to using a rectangular pattern. So I'm going to select increment, which is going to be a UV distance. Now, when we think about UV, if you've never done any surfacing work or you haven't come across these terms before, think about them as the coordinate system as applied to the face. Now, in this case, U is going to be in the Y direction, and in this case, V is going to be in the X direction based on my view cube. So now that we understand that UV is just X and Y as applied to a face, which doesn't necessarily mean it's on a plane, then we can start to increment or adjust these values. So the U distance I'm going to set to 1, and the V distance I'm going to set to 2. Now, you will notice that there's nothing going on the screen right now. We're not seeing any preview, and I'm going to adjust the perimeter offset. I'm going to set that at 0. So nothing's happening on this face, and we're not seeing any changes to it. Now, I've noticed that this is fairly common, especially when you start and you have an object that is not at your origin. So if I turn on my origin and I take a look at where that is, you can see that the arrow that we're seeing is actually based at the origin. And if I begin to slide this to the right, you'll notice that what this is doing is it's creating this perimeter offset value. So the perimeter offset, at least at a first glance, appears to be based on the coordinate system at first and not based on the perimeter of our object. Now, in some cases, we might need to slide this around to find the center, but I want to reset this to 0. And I'm going to turn off clear perimeter. Now, clear perimeter will take any instance of the pattern that is outside of our selected face, and it'll turn them off. Now, as soon as we turn off clear perimeter, we're starting to see a preview on the screen. Now, it's actually kind of hard to see, so I'm going to use Control and the number 7 on the screen. And Control and 7 is actually the way to go into wireframe mode. So if you're on a Mac, you can use Command and 7, I believe. But now we can see a preview of what's going on. And basically what happened is all of these little spheres were touching each other. So when we clicked clear perimeter, or when that option is turned on, all the previews were gone. So what we want to do in this case is we want to start to adjust these values. We've got a size going from 1 millimeter up to 5 millimeters, and our distance between those is too small. So I need to increase this so that the distance between each of those is large enough so that we can actually see a pattern forming. So if I go back to a top view, we can now start to see that pattern. If I select clear perimeter, any of those spheres that overlap the outside perimeter are not going to be removed. We don't have to turn that option on, but just note that's what it does. So for this first example, we can see that we're going from 1 millimeter at the center, we're going up to 5 millimeters at the furthest extent. And again, if I change the spread to the negative side, it's going to go towards the size limit 1. So more of them are going to be closer to 1 millimeter. If I go the other direction, more of them will be closer to 5 millimeter. So it's going to just depend on what you're trying to do. Now that we can see these, the U distance, if we reset these values, you'll notice 4 is going to increase or decrease, depending on how we change the values, the distance between each object. So if I set this to 6 in the V direction or 8 in the V direction, you can see that we're starting to get more space as we go along that X direction. If I change this one to 8 as well, you can see that we're getting more space in the Y direction. Now, this value needs to be adjusted based on the shape that you're working with. In this case, mostly a square. So I'm going to reset this one to 6 in this direction, and I'm going to leave it at 8 in the other. And the last thing is we need to make sure that we're cutting. We can also intersect. We could keep just the overlapping pieces. We can join them together, or we can create an entirely new body. For this example, cut is going to be what we want, and I'm going to use Control and 6 or Command and 6 to bring back my shading. So you can see there, that's the first look at geometric pattern on a mostly square face. Let's reapply this. Let's take another look at it at a rectangular face. And again, because we have clear perimeter turned off, it is showing the extent of this. And again, Control or Command 7 helps us get a little bit better view of the preview. I don't really like the fact that the face stays shaded and the preview is such a light gray that it's really hard for us to see when we're looking down on it from the top. So as we're looking at this one, again, same exact example, but we can just modify these values. I'm going to go 4 in the U direction, 12 in the V direction. I'm going to give this a larger difference. So we're going to go from 1 to 10. And you can see that instantly causes a problem in this U direction. So because I've got 10 millimeters between, I need to increase that so they don't touch. What I would really love to see happen with this tool, at least with this rectangular orientation, is I would love to see that value be variable. I would love to see it be able to change based on the size limit and the spread that you're using. So because we've got these smaller objects right here in the center, I would love these patterns to be a little bit closer, which would end up causing more of an arc shape here. So again, that's just kind of my initial impression of that, what I would like to see. Because we didn't use the option to sort of cut anything that overlapped the outside on the offset, you can see here that the spheres actually go over the edge. So again, just another application of the tool. Now that we've taken a look at those two simple examples, let's move on to a cylindrical face and then some faces that are, in this case, an ellipse, and then this one is done with a spline. So we're going to go to geometric pattern. We're going to select this face. Again, Control or Command and 7 so I can see the preview a little bit better. And this is what the rectangular distribution looks like. So we can see here the preview on the screen based on that rectangular distribution, but we can move on to things like triangular. We can do hexagonal. We've got circular, which seems to be more applicable to the shape. And then we've got this radial option. Now, each of these are going to open up different options for distances and alignments. You'll notice that when we go to hexagonal, we just have this distance value. When we're in triangular, we have the same options. And when we go to circular, we then have a radial distance and a distance between. And again, just like before, I would really love it if these could vary the distance based on the size. That would be extremely helpful when trying to create patterns like this. And again, if we clear perimeter, it's going to get rid of anything that overlaps the outside of that edge. So it's a good idea to play around with these. Again, you can use the slider to adjust the distribution between these two. And then again, we're cutting away, so that's applying it to a cylindrical body. But what happens if we take a shape that is not cylindrical? So once again, let's go ahead to geometric pattern. select the face that we want to use. And now this is where things get a little interesting. Now, I would love it if this tool allowed us to take a look at the outside of the perimeter and actually adjust the shape to it. So, for example, this cylindrical or circular distribution is purely circular. So, if we increase the radial distance, for example, if we set this to 10, that is the distance between all these objects. If we set it to 15, then we get into a situation where not as many fit. If we reduce it to 5, you can see that we get more, and it's beginning to overlap the outside. But if I go down even smaller, let's say 4, you'll notice that the size gets smaller. If I get 3, then more start to fill in here. If I go down to 2, then you can see we're just sort of filling in this area because this is the perimeter that it's using. It's sort of locking it there. Once it starts to overlap it here, we really have no way to extend it out in this direction. We could use rectangular, but again, that doesn't really give us the effect that we want with a shape like this. We do have radial, but again, radial is looking at the perimeter. So as soon as one of these objects, the best I can tell, as soon as one hits the perimeter, then that's where it's going to start capping that outside shape. So the radial distance, again, is going to be sort of the distance between each of these. If I set this to 5, you can see they begin to space out. The quantity is going to affect the number of items. That's pretty straightforward. If I double this, you'll notice that we start to get rows in between. So there is going to be a limit where you're kind of reducing the return on your investment. So once again, that it kind of is one of those situations where I think having this geometric pattern based on the true shape, right? We don't have an option that's based on the perimeter. We have the distribution based on all these separate options. So having these different options like triangular, hexagonal, and rectangular will allow us to fill up this shape. But the circular and the radial ones sort of fall short because they aren't able to extend out unless you do something like this manually. The other option is to sort of fake this. And the way that we would fake this is by creating a true cylinder larger than this, and then creating these as new bodies. And then if we create them as new bodies, we can then use them to combine or intersect or cut away from this shape. So it's just a little bit of extra work, and unfortunately, it just means that you need to plan ahead when you're doing a shape like this because you need to have sort of a fake body to make that work and then cut away. So keep that in mind if you're trying to go for a shape that is not rectangular or cylindrical or hexagonal, then you're going to start to run into those potential issues. And with that said, let's take a look at it on this shape right here. Now, I'm not really a big Star Trek fan, but somehow I just drew the shape and it kind of looks like the Star Trek logo. That wasn't the intent, but it's just wanted to get sort of an organic kind of shape. And again, what we'll kind of notice is that we're not able to completely go out to the extents. I'm going to increase the quantity of this so that way we can kind of see a bit more. And it kind of comes short down here and up here. It just doesn't quite get it when we're trying to use radial or circular. Now we can use things like rectangular and get out there, but again, what we're doing is we're not really getting that distribution that we would potentially look for on a shape like this. I really think that both radial and circular would really benefit from being able to push completely out and past the extents without having to fake it with another body, creating these as new bodies and then using combine. There are alignment options. So for example, if you align to the left or the right, or if you align the V direction to the left or the right, it is able to go up to those areas, those edges, and then you do have some control where you can potentially make the shape there. But again, it doesn't ever really push all the way out to the extents. Not to really draw too many comparisons, but if you are familiar with SolidWorks and have used that before, they have a tool called Fill Pattern, which it's not quite this geometric pattern. It doesn't have all the same sort of controls, but it's based solely on the shape or the boundary that you're using. And that boundary can be the extents of the face that you selected, or it can actually be a sketch, I believe. So having that functionality, I think, would be extremely helpful to be able to take this to the next level for sort of non-traditional shapes. If we're designing products we're not going to be stuck with just circles and rectangles and squares. We want something a little bit more elaborate. And the last two examples here are ones that I haven't really had great luck with yet. Now, these are just the revolves, and this one is sort of, one's convex and one's concave. And I want to take a look at what happens when I try to apply the patterns to these. So again, I'm going to go into that wireframe mode. I'm going to select the face of interest. And again, I have this clear pattern, clear perimeter turned off. You'll notice that we're kind of getting these little previews. We've got one at the center, and these are kind of like around the outside. The radial distance values, I find that we have to kind of go in and reset these each time. I'm going to increase the quantity. Sometimes it helps us kind of see what's going on. And the size limit, I'm going to reduce. I'm going to go from 1 to 5 and increase that a bit. And you'll notice that when we take a look at this, it's sort of bunching up on the side. So we want to make sure we reset our alignment. And we just try some other options. If we try circular, you'll notice again, it's bunched all the way up on the side. If we rotate this around, we obviously have this face selected, but it's just not doing a very good job of creating the pattern on this face. And if we clear perimeter, it's going to get rid of all of those because they're outside of that perimeter. So what I found is sometimes deselecting and reselecting that face can help. Trying a different pattern type can often help. Making sure that the values for U and V distance are reasonable for the sizes that you're working with. Then I go back to a top view. And you can see that we are getting the pattern on here. We can try triangular, rectangular, but then when we go to the circular or radial, it just seems to kind of bunch up around the outside. And if I clear this face and I try the other one where we're sort of inverse, we're inside of there, you can see that it's kind of the same thing. We're not really getting the shape or the distribution that we would expect. We do have some when we go into the other ones like triangular, we can modify these values. But again, it's not really giving me what I would expect. So at least in my initial experience, it hasn't really worked with faces that are concave or convex. I'm hoping it will, or maybe I'm just not using it properly. But I have noticed that it hasn't really been very happy with these shapes so far. Now, these are true revolves. I drew an arc and I simply revolved it about an axis. And it might do better with something that is a little bit more organic. But just note that, that's kind of what's going on. And also note that it did put the sphere here at the origin. And if we look at that, that sphere is actually part of this. So another interesting thing is, again, with that initial example, that offset value was based off of the coordinate system. So that is something that we need to be mindful of if you tend to move your designs away from the coordinate system. In this case, I drew them just sort of all over the place, but having the coordinate system be over here could be a potential problem. Let's do a quick test. I'm going to delete that last one, and I want to focus my attention on this body. Notice that a lot of the other ones are sort of in the way. So I want to just hide some stuff, and I want to go to Modify, Align. And I'm going to take the bottom center of that. I'm going to just plop it at the origin. And then I'm going to try that geometric pattern again. So now that this is completely at the origin, I'm going to go into my wireframe display and start to manipulate some of these values. So if I go to a cylindrical or circular pattern or radial pattern, again, you can kind of see that we're not really getting the preview that we would expect, even though we moved it to the origin. So just something to keep in mind that it is potentially problematic with these convex or concave revolves, but it does seem to work on all the other faces, even though there are some potential issues with extents that you might need to go in and fake with a larger shape if you want to, say, remove a radial type pattern from a shape like this. So again, this was kind of a first look at this tool. I haven't played around with it that much. I started to play around with it a little bit yesterday just to kind of see what it was about. And I wanted to come up with these examples as kind of the things that we would come across as designers, things that we would potentially want to apply this to. So at this stage, again, my suggestions or my recommendations is that it works really well for things like square, rectangular faces, a circular face. And these are all planar. It works pretty well on those. Once you start to get to faces or shapes that are more organic in nature, If you're trying to apply a circular or radial pattern, my suggestion is that you go in and you create a dummy face. You create the geometric pattern based on that face with new bodies, and then you go back and you use combine to remove them from whichever shape you want. It will require a little bit more manual work, but honestly, it's less manual work than what we would have to do now to make this shape happen, anyways. So, with that in mind, if there are any questions or if you have played with it and have any feedback as well, then please leave a comment below. And as always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.